In this video, I'm going to discuss the fallacy of the 5-room dungeon. So what is a 5-room dungeon? If you do a Google and search for it, you'll find a whole bunch of articles about a whole bunch of people saying, oh, follow the 5-room dungeon idea, that you have basically 5 rooms in the dungeon. You have an entrance, you have a puzzle or role-playing challenge, and then you have some sort of red herring and a climax and a plot twist. The idea is that it always gives every member of the party something to do, and it's a small, short-term fit to an adventure, that it's going to be a short adventure taking only one session. Actually, this was very reminiscent, for those of you with any background in taking honors English or such, it's very similar to Edgar Allan Poe's rules for a short story. Edgar Allan Poe came up with 6 rules for a short story. If you're not familiar with them, one is that it's be complete by itself, be able to be read in one sitting, which he later defined somewhere between a half an hour to at most 2 hours, have every word used for important effect, have a good opening sentence that is developed throughout the work, end at its climax, and have no more characters than are necessary for these actions. Now that fits very well with this 5-room challenge, that it's complete in itself, that you can complete it in one sitting, that it's one adventure, that there's no extraneous characters or things in there, and it's just like a short story. But for those of us who like longer stories, like any of you have read any of the Game of Thrones, Clash of Kings, you've read some interesting books that are much longer, much deeper stories, much more interesting plot. There's a lot of literary criticism why Edgar Allan Poe's rules, though good, don't fit everyone, because you can't create a complex interaction that goes on for a lot of things. For those of you who've read like David Weber, I mean, he does some setup in some of the early, in On Basilisk Station that doesn't come to fruition until I think it's the 3rd or 4th book in the series, which is on the Fields of Dishonor. So what happens is that you run into where you write complex stories, complex things like that. So I was doing a little bit of research on this when I was writing up this, and Albert Zuckerman, who wrote a book called on writing, and he said, characters in fiction, as in life, are defined by what they do. In big novels, the main characters do extraordinary things. In big adventures, the main characters do extraordinary things. And I love the quote that's repeated at the beginning of the 1980s version of Conan. Between the time when the oceans drank Atlantis and the rise of the sons of Ares, there was an age undreamed of. And unto this Conan, destined to wear the jeweled crown of Aquilonia upon a troubled brow. It is I, his chronicler, who alone can tell thee of his saga. Let me tell you of the days of high adventure. Now, let's take a look at a 5-room house. And I'll pull this little picture up and we can look at it and see, this is a 5-room house, a floor plan. This is where your evil overlord is going to live? Come on. If you have a monster or a creature that is worth anything, yes, they may live here because that's where they grew up, where they have, that they're of middle class. They're not the high evil overlord ruling over things. If you're down with the mundane characters, you're not much above a shopkeep. It says that your fighters and your characters are not doing extraordinary things if you're going after someone who lives in a 5-room house, unless they're hiding, out that you could do something like that, but that would be the rare exception. Now let's take a look at a mansion. Here's the floor plan for a mansion. I just picked off the internet. I'll put it's just a big home with lots of rooms, lots of things like that. This is where an evil overlord would live. This is where a king would live. This is where the big characters doing extraordinary things would want to adventure. And so I think it's a fallacy that you're trying to create these small adventures and then link them all together so it fits within a nice time frame. I mean, that's the fallacy of the short story. Edgar Allan Poe did his criticism of it, and Poe is known more for his criticism in literary circles than for his poems, because his criticism is actually even better than his poems, but it's very literary, very dry. It's not the type of thing, not like what evokes, his the poem The Raven, or the Cask of Amontillado, or The Black Cat. Those are great poems, and they're great short stories, The Fall of the House of Usher, and things like that. They're designed to be written in a half an hour. But I throw against them some of the more interesting longer term. If we can compare it to television, you take a look at your average 30-minute sitcom. Oh, so your 30-minute sitcom. One of the complaints against them was that stories didn't continue on. There weren't plot twists. I remember when Babylon 5 came out, and the challenge was that Babylon 5 had a story arc that went on across seasons, which was amazing. Today we've seen Breaking Bad going on for, the continuing character, and it tells a story. You have Game of Thrones, you have Mad Men, which they're saying are some of the best television that's ever been produced, and they're not in one sitting. They go on for a long period of time. You can't quite do them as even a 2-hour movie, because they're bigger than that. They go on. And you can take a look at what they did with The Lord of the Rings. They took Tolkien's books. Well, actually, if you know anything about what Tolkien actually wrote, The Lord of the Rings is a single book, and the publisher freaked out because it was too massive, that it couldn't be published as a single book, because actually at the time they had a limitation on how many pages could be bound inside a book. If you're not familiar with that, that was one of the reasons why it was broken into 3 separate books, and why the breaks between the different sections don't really fit well. You've got Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers and Return of the King were actually supposed to be one book. And it was just broken that way because there were limitations at the time. Today they can actually print them. I've got a copy of Lord of the Rings as a single book, because we've improved in our technology of binding books, and you can electronically, that's a whole different story. You can get the whole thing as one large electronic book. But we don't have that problem if you're gaming. If you're doing one-shots, and if that's what you're doing for fun, I encourage you to continue. If that's what you enjoy, if you want to use the 5-room plot idea for your simple little one-shot adventures, it's a good idea for a one-shot. But for a campaign where you're dealing with things like that, you want to be able to do foreshadowing. The most interesting things that have happened to me is where you introduce something in one adventure, and the characters 8 weeks later, they suddenly, it's eight adventures later, that something comes back that, oh, you did something in this previous adventure, and it's coming back to haunt you, or it's coming back to benefit you. Or, it's somebody's heard of you. I've heard of you. The fame of the character spreads throughout, that you establish what you can and can't, what your character can and cannot do. So that's the advantage to doing a more complete campaign. And that's why I call it a fallacy of the 5-room dungeon, is that it's just like living in this little 5-room house as opposed to living in this mansion? Which would you prefer to live in? Which would you prefer to rob? That's an interesting question. I'm not advocating that you go out and rob somebody's home or whatever, but as a character, if you're presented with the opportunity to go rob some little home or some mansion, which one is your player character going to do? Obviously, you're going to go after the bigger bucks. You're going to go after the more interesting challenge. You're going to try and do extraordinary things. And how does your 5-room dungeon fit into that concept of doing extraordinary things? Extraordinary things mean that it's going to take you time. You're going to have to get all the little pieces. You're going to have to do a bunch of research. You're going to have to go through all of this. And this whole concept that, oh, we have one big boss that you're going to fight in this adventure. What? I'm sorry. I just find that sort of stupid, because I would rather have them, for those of you who want to look up some of the fun things to do, there's the rules for the evil overlord. It's a fun one to search up. It's things not that an evil overlord should not do, and you should not, kill your most loyal lieutenant. It's a humorous read. I'll put a link down below. But what happens is that you want your evil overlord or your the person who's trying to rule the world or whatever, not to make these stupid things, not to live in this 5-room house. You want them to live in this mansion. Which means your characters are going to have to go through large numbers of rooms to find them. It says, anybody take a look, just do a Google on Bill Gates' home or the Winchester mansion, to give you an example of a massive mansion that would be a wonderful role-playing place to the floor plan of that, which is totally bizarre because of they never stopped building for so long, and because you could, I'll let somebody else Google that and look it up. But you look at the whole going through those type of places, and they're not just this simple little 5-room or maybe 6 rooms or something like that. When I've been through castles in Germany, going into Neuschwanstein, which was Mad Ludwig's castle, and there was only, they've only finished the first 2 floors, I think, of Neuschwanstein because he ran out of money. And some of the other castles that Mad Ludwig finished, and you saw how beautiful they are, but they're not just a single room. There are many rooms. There's secret passages. There's whole plot twists you can put into this. You can see, it's the pyramids are massive structures, and they have, I think, more than 5 rooms. Count them up. You have the king chambers, the queen chamber. You look at how complicated those structures were, and we still don't know if there's more rooms inside them, and there's a whole interesting twist of that. But you take a look at building more complicated adventures, and don't restrict yourself to just, it's got to be finished in one session, because I think that's a major fallacy. Because if the people you're playing with constantly turns over, that you play very infrequently, I can understand that. That's a reasonable thing to do. But if you're looking for the more complete adventure, where you have your characters grow, where they learn things, they go through different challenges, you want to build a campaign, and you want to have high adventure, not this simple thing. So like I love the quote. It says, "Let me tell thee of this saga. Let me tell you of the days of high adventure." So my advice is, go forth and let's have some high adventure, not this mundane 5-room excrement. And Let's have something where you challenge your players, you give them something to do where they can do extraordinary things, and it's not predictable, where the monsters you're fighting would actually be happy to live in what you've put them in. If you put yourself in your creature or your boss's place, would you want to live in this environment? If you're this big, powerful creature and you've got these minions, whatever. I mean, let's play the game of Overlord. That's a fun one. And what happens is you see how you constantly build and expand it. So go forth and create high adventure and not just searching a 5-room home. If you like my video, press the thumbs up button. I'd appreciate that. Or if this interests you, you can always subscribe to my channel. There's a button right above. I look forward to hearing some comments. Tell me what you think about this, and I'll try and reply, and we can see if I'll do some more of these. Thank you.